Hi, this is Austin Wintory, and this is the Game Maker's Notebook. Continuing the trend in expanding the horizons of the conversations being had here, today I had a really inspiring and interesting talk with Eduardo Vaisman, an audio director at Ubisoft who was in charge of all things sound and music for Far Cry 6. So we spoke at length of his incredible journey into video games via film, and then the rather extreme lengths gone to capture the authenticity of the island nation of Yara for the latest Far Cry. It was a real blast, and I hope you enjoyed as much as I did.
Welcome to the Game Maker's Notebook, a podcast featuring a series of in-depth one-on-one conversations between game makers providing a thoughtful, intimate perspective on the business and craft of interactive entertainment. The Game Maker's Notebook is presented by the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, a member-driven organization dedicated to the recognition and advancement of interactive entertainment.
Good afternoon, Eduardo.
Good afternoon.
How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, Austin.
This is a fun shift of pace from these that I've been doing the last couple of years, with only one prior exception. You're now, I guess, the second, audio director, sort of sound guru, who's not just a freelance composer. So you are carrying a mantle of responsibility that was begun by Phil Kovacs.
Yeah, very big shoes to fill, man. I don't know how to feel about it.
Well, he did a terrible job, so it was absolutely disastrous conversation. So it can only improve from here. But no, it's a real pleasure. There's a bunch of places that we can go, but in this case, I'll just be a little bit selfish because we know each other a little bit, but I don't, there's a lot I don't know about you. So I'm just going to kind of selfishly learn about you. And I hope you'll indulge me and not feel too interrogated.
No, not at all.
Good. Love it. Well, let's kind of go back to the early days because obviously the position that you're in right now with Ubisoft is not typically one that is one's first job in this industry. And so I'm going to just wager that you have a sort of a long and interesting history that leads up to your current position. And I really do want to get into details on especially Far Cry, but why don't you just give me a quick rundown on, where you grew up and how you sort of found your way on this path to where you are now in particular. Like, one thing I don't actually know is if you are the brand of audio director that comes at it from being a musician and a composer in your own right, or if you come at it from the history of sound design, the way about half is one, half is the other. So where do you kind of land in all of that?
Okay, I would say mine is a story of travels and transformations, maybe. I'm originally from Buenos Aires, from Argentina, and that's where I was born and raised. And I start in all these game audio thing, let's say very, very early, probably with music. Like many of my colleagues, I start studying piano when I was 12, and then start to trying to get into synthesizers and start playing in bands, in bars when I was 13. It was just after the military dictatorship, so there was a blooming of the scene in bars and people coming, going outside again, and lots of parties. Democracy is back, and we were embracing it, and jam sessions. I guess it's a
good time to be a musician then.
Oh yeah, it was a good time to have any sort of a bohemian life in a way.
Right. What got
And
you onto the piano? Like, what was the initial spark, or was it your parents encouraging, or what landed you on the piano when you were 12?
I I always wanted to learn an instrument. My mom used to sing. But
Mm.
she's an actress now, but she was a singer back in the days, and uh, and there was a lot of music at home. No professional musicians. I come from a middle class. The middle class from the 70s,
Sure.
a South American the family. And yep, I said I want to learn piano. I start studying classic for a few years. Then I start feeling like, okay, no, I want something else. So I got into jazz, and there's more into popular music. And of course, playing in bands was the things that attract me the most. And I have my first synth was a Poly 800 Korg, and then I got an electric piano and play with a blues band, pop band, until I was mature enough to get uh, an analog Korg MKS 20 and play in a punk rock band. And that was probably the pinnacle of my musical career.
I mean, but it sounds like you were kind of dove in immediately. I mean, all of that is, that's legit investment in, proper gear, and obviously playing with these different bands. Like, what kind of music were you guys playing? Were you playing, like, especially on the jazz side, was it, focusing on standards, or were you writing music
No, no.
already?
That's one of the things that I luckily realized early in my career, that I did some courses on composing and harmony, and I found out it was not my thing. I am the technical oriented person, and
Ah,
a movie lover, and big movie buff. Also from a very early age, going to art cinema houses that were in Argentina. There's a long tradition of European films and author film in Argentina, more than the Hollywood mainstream, what we call the tanks. And that got me closer to friends that were studying film or producing their own independent films, short films. And because I was playing, they asked me to make the music, try to compose something for them. Never was very happy. But at the same time, I was noticing that since I was sequencing back in the days, with an old PC XT using the first Cakewalk 2.0 in
oh man,
MS-DOS,
amazing.
and yeah, with an DX72 that I modified with some circuits I bought. And I realized that I liked how the music sounded, not what I did, but how it sounded in terms of the sound quality and texture. But the dialogue were bad. The ambiances were all over the place. There was unexisting foley. Third world country. We do what we can with the resources we have. And then I start looking into. I want to go further with this. I want to make the sound, not only the music, but the sound as a whole, another character in the story. Try to tell a secondary story with sound effects, with ambiances, and I got then into more sound editing and recording my stuff.
What
And
age are you by the time you're kind of having this realization?
17, 18 maybe.
Wow,
And
you're really ahead of the curve. I feel like that's all real kind of like precocious, like ambitious sort of for a 17-year-old.
yeah, I went to a technical high school in and that got me closer to computers and technology, and I always tried to mix technology and music. So I I managed someone in the late 80s to smuggle an MPU 401, the first Roland interface, MIDI interface, in Argentina, and I started sequencing with that, and then learning by myself how to sync different computers and sequencers, and working with SMPTE, and I got my shot when an audio sound director for movies called me to work in the studio. He was working in a score of a film that needed sequenced parts and live, and we were recording in a 2 inches tape, and they didn't know how to make them work together. A computer with
Right.
a tape machine. So I say, I think I can make it work. Just bluffing. I was a kid, and those were professionals. With this guy won a Cannes award already for the sound of another movie he made. So I went there. I made it work, and after sweating, like a pig, and at the end of a session, he say, "Are you interested on showing up in the studio, being an apprentice?" I left my home quite young, so I was working full time to pay the rent and get some food on the table, and say, yeah, I do it anyways. It was the days where there was no education on sound or sound for film. It was more about what you can do in the field or being an
Yeah.
apprentice in a film studio. This was from the days when the film re-recording stage and the laboratories and the editing booth with moviolas and physical material were all together, and I went there and I got crazy. So this is it. I want to make sound for film, and I I knew that I wasn't good enough composing. I didn't have the what I call the gymnastics of composing in different styles. Tried to go deeper, and what I produced wasn't really good material. So, but I was feeling okay. But I think telling stories with sound could be something I felt more at home, and I start there for free. Of course, they are not paying me, and very usual back in the days with young people and trainees, especially in Argentina. So I
And this
work
is all
full
still
day.
happening in Buenos Aires, right?
Yes, yes, yes. In Buenos Aires. So I started working in feature films and cutting sound, being familiar with sound libraries back in the day in quarter-inch tapes. When the sound ideas came in actually reels, and you have a small piece of paper telling you in which feet of the tape you have this specific sound, and then you
Wow.
copy it to a sprocket mag, and then you edit.
Do you ever, as just an aside, do you ever, every time you open up Pro Tools and, copy paste or hit undo, do you find yourself ever thinking, I miss the tactile kind of tangible quality of working with tape? Or do you think, I do not miss I'm very lucky to have my Control Z or my Apple Z. I don't miss those days. Where do you kind of end up there?
No, no, no. Silicon God bless digital for the things it allows us to do. It's just so painful when you need to do, a crossfade, just cutting physical material and scraping the emulsion so it doesn't make a pop, and calibrating the bias in all the machines. The time we waste, on hardware is, I'm not missing analog days. I leave that for the nostalgia that I found. That most of the people who had nostalgia is people that never dealt with the real thing.
I think that's exactly. I think that's exactly right. That's so funny because anytime I've ever asked anybody about that sort of thing, whose career spans the pre-digital period, or they came in right at the time where things were shifting, I totally confess to being one of those people where I experimented when I was coming of age on making tape loops and playing around with analog synths and doing a lot of the kinds of things in the manner you're describing. But all of my professional work has been in an era where we're using sequencers and things like that and digital recording. And so I do have a little bit of that nostalgia where I'm like, oh, there's something really lovely about working with the tape. And anytime I mention that to somebody who spent more time with it, they always say, you obviously didn't spend a lot of time with it, because it's not something to envy.
Now, when you spend like an hour and a half before start getting into the jam of a recording session, just setting the console the way it was before, with no phone cameras, just taking notes in a piece of paper where every equalizer was, because when you punch, otherwise it sounds completely different. And then you finally punch and you remember you forgot one patch in the patch bay, or one parameter in the outboard reverb you were using, and then you run a take and say, no, give me all automated, give me press one button and I can continue. So the creative flow, it doesn't stop on dealing with knobs and physical stuff. Of course, it's nice, ride the fader. I have a fader here, a fader port, that, because I like, writing faders and knobs, but not that.
Yeah, I mean, there is something unique about it, but I think it's hard to argue that we've upgraded. But I also love when you hear these kinds of stories, and someone like yourself really falls in love with this art form despite all those tedious kind of menial tasks. I feel like it's somehow extra special. Again, maybe I'm just being a romantic because I didn't really have to work during that era, but I don't know, the fact that it could get a hold on you and you wouldn't think, oh, my God, this is just too long spent not creating art, to screw this. Especially knowing how young you were, I don't know, it seems remarkable that you wouldn't lose interest just because of the tedium of it.
Oh, no. And because I was learning a lot, and I was avid. There was no much things on internet, and there wasn't much access to books,
Right, sure, of
of
course.
audio and material. It was all word of mouth or how to do things. So you needed to be in the kitchen. There's no tutorials. So if you wanted to learn how to put a microphone in front of an amp, or in front of a cello, you needed to be there and work with a engineer and just take notes. What is he taking from the from the cabinet? So how is he doing it? And that is probably what it takes me, just to move this a conversation forward, what it took me to take my first travel. After working in a post-production, film post-production studio, I finished several feature films, and I was the first schools for film audio and universities for media started popping up in Argentina. Then they called me without the post-secondary education to be a teacher there. So it was a lot of fun because I taught from the experience, from firsthand experience. But then there is this ceiling, this limitation. I wanted to be a re-recording mixer and mix movies in a Dolby stage and THX stage. And there was only one in Argentina back in the days, and the access was very limited. And the professionals, the old generation, was very jealous, to the point of covering with one hand when they were adjusting things with the other. Just
Really?
because it was whoa. It was hardcore. And
They thought you were like the wolf biting at their heels, I guess.
Yeah, they thought that, okay, if you know that you need to cut dialogue at this frequency, you can steal my job.
Right.
Then I thought, okay, I needed to go somewhere else and learn, how to mix a movie, because here I don't have much range. I was editing, I was premixing, and that was it for film and for TV shows. So a friend in Mexico told me, my uncle is a sound designer there. He's been there like forever, and an exile from Argentina. And now he's mixing a movie, and I asked him if you want to go there and see how it's done. And say, okay, it was the Studios Churubusco. They have the biggest THX re-recording stage in Latin America by then. And yes, so I say I pay my own trip there, as an educational thing, and I spent like 3 weeks in a re-recording stage, just sitting in a corner, seeing how real things were done, mixing to the A88 at that point, and making the optical negative for films. Then the first Dolby Digital also in negative, and the printing process. And when I finished my visit there, I asked the guy, my mentor, Nerio Barberis, do you think I could get some work here with you maybe? And he said, I cannot guarantee to have work. I cannot guarantee you a salary, but if I have work, you will have work. So I returned to Argentina.
That's a big impression to make on someone in just a few weeks.
Yeah, well, it's I don't know. I I do what I do. I helped, and I paid attention. I also helped them after hours, after the mix, to cut sound effects and do some dialogue for another 2 movies they were working on. And so they probably saw the potential, and basically we were getting along pretty well, like-minded people.
Right.
And from an older generation, but a good generation of people that made the pioneers in a way to tell stories in South American movies in a different way.
It sounds like also a total culture difference from the way you were describing this Argentinian old school guys, who were essentially trying to block you. It sounds like this here was essentially the exact opposite of somebody just sort of offering, opening their doors and being extremely welcoming.
Yeah, very generous. And that is, I think, um, what being politically prosecuted and exiled give you. He needed to live along other people, other Argentines in Mexico there, just escaping, first to Peru, then trying to find a way to get out of there without being caught, with the friends or relatives being caught and being killed. So the generosity of the people that made it there and supported each other, there was a community of so much empathy and collaboration on everything, and also creative synergy on in in the movie industry and in the community of Argentinian exiled. And yeah,
Sure.
so I jumped. I see the kind of people that were there, so open and generous and talented. This guy Nerio, he could hear the compression in dialogue that oh, have you noticed that? How the dialogue is being compressed in the transit? I say, man, I can't. Sorry, I can't hear. And then I learned, because he taught me. But
It's like Jedi
also,
training.
yeah, very very good ears, and
Yeah, for real.
and dedicated to bring always quality up. When you have to deal constantly with the budgets and limitations from every aspect in low budget movies and productions, you are pushed to bring your best and and try to learn how to do the most with the least amount of resources. And that's one of the things I learned. And these people were, you know uh, walking like they were talking on on this. So long story short, I returned to Argentina, talked to my girlfriend, who became my wife, and say, okay, do you want to live in Mexico? What? In Mexico City? Okay. 2 weeks, we shut down everything. I quit my two
Wow,
jobs,
that's
and
fast.
and we flew to Mexico, and that is where my Mexican years started. And I worked in another 21 feature films over there in that
Wow.
studio, and with productions from Colombia and from Spain and Mexico, and in also from the States. I had the incredible opportunity to record the music on set of the movie, um, Frida, with Salma Hayek
Yeah,
back in
yeah,
the
of
days,
course. Yeah, Julie Taymor
recording.
movie.
Yeah, recording Chabela Vargas.
Oh man, that
Yeah,
that
oof.
specific recording of La Llorona is one of my favorite pieces of music ever.
Oh man, I was so scared and I was shaking when I was putting microphones, and then but the people were so committed to be the best. So the the director of photography was Rodrigo Prieto, you know, uh, Oscar award. He worked with everyone in Hollywood, uh, and I asked him, I want to have a good recording of Chabela. I don't know how many more years we will have this legend among us, so let's make a good one. And he said, "Okay, I give you where the frame cuts, and you put all the microphones you want." So I was recording with another one of my mentors, Lena Askenazi, a Cuban sound designer and living in Mexico. Is amazing. One of the best professionals I worked with. She was recording, and we brought an U87. We put it just when the frame cuts. We have an U87 hanging just in front of Chabela Vargas, and I was also doing boom, and just in case. So we have multiple perspectives, and and it worked really well. The musicians were also playing live.
That's just incredible. I had no idea you were. I really. I have a soft spot for that film, and it's one of those that I've always loved the fact that Elliot Goldenthal, who is so well known for these giant, grand, truly epic orchestral scores, goes and wins an Oscar for that movie with this very intimate score that's, just like the guitar and some percussion and very, very small and sort of delicate but rich and beautiful. And it's just, I love everything about all of that. And I can't believe I had no idea that you were there, especially recording that recording. It's just that's amazing.
Yeah, there were no playback in the movie. It was all recorded live, just hiding microphones. For that scene, Chabela only sing with his two guitarists, so and she needed to see them, and so we put them in scaffolding, with two chefs. So the guys
Wow.
were just sitting on scaffolding, playing guitar, and say the same thing with the other scenes, just hidden microphones and lots of cooperation. And Julie Tamer and Salma Hayek were just amazing, creative driving forces in that movie.
That's amazing. So that would have been about 2001, 2002.
Yeah.
Where do games start to enter into your life then? It must be soon around that time, I would think.
Well, then I stayed in Mexico until 2005. I wanted to jump to Canada, and it was very difficult for immigration. The line from Mexico was longer, so I was recommended to go back to Argentina and try from there. Is what I did, because I wanted to end up in Canada. Was my dream. This is my dream country. I really love it here. So I returned to Argentina, and then in 2007, I was starting my process, and I received a phone call from a company I worked with. It wasn't an audio company. It was a visual effects company, because I'm also a picture editor assistant, and I worked also cutting a movie and being a film editor. From the
I love
days
how
you
we
need
just kind of skipped past that part.
From the days you need to actually make negative cut list to get the film done. And so they offered me a very entry level job in a visual effects company, but I wanted to land it here, and I knew that it would be very, very difficult for me. I didn't have the money or the resources to apply and get money in the bank and everything. And again, they told me, okay, we have a contract, so you can only work for us. So you will be a visitor, and not a visitor, but we give you a work permit, and with a little bit over a minimum wage. And then I again, 3 weeks later, I jumped in. I went into a plane. Other, personal tragedies happened in between, that I was broken and had no money. I had to borrow money for the plane tickets and everything. But I came here, left my wife and daughter in Argentina for almost 2 months.
Wow.
Not just to set foot in here, But my agenda was to give them a better future, and this was for me the country where I wanted to give them a better future. So I uh, rent a room in with other four people I didn't know in Craigslist, and start working from there. When I got my first and a half salary, I rented something, borrow some more money from good friends, and got the tickets for my wife and daughter. So the family was reunited, and from there we had probably the first 3-4 years kind of rough, because I was working full time, trying to make the ends meet, and getting some side jobs on moonlighting for other feature films from Argentina or Mexico. They sent me. So during the day I worked like 10 hours, chug a couple of monster of monster drinks, and keep editing in my 2007 iBook with a Mbox Mini, cutting dialogue until I fell asleep. But then I found out that Ubisoft was opening in Toronto, and from the day one I say, man, I need to work there. That is where it needs to go. And I was obsessed, start following them in Facebook, the days I was in Facebook, and waiting for the time they open a position for sound designer. So
what put them on your radar? Like, were you a gamer in the background of all this? Sounds like you didn't even have a moment to breathe, never mind play games. But what I mean, obviously Ubisoft is a huge, for anybody that works in post-production, I would think that if you're in Canada, there's no way to not be aware of Ubisoft. They employ hundreds and hundreds of people at a really high level of professionalism, but still something had to have put them on your radar.
Oh yeah, I'm a born gamer. Long short story. In 1979, my grandmother, who was a teacher, had a spot in a hotel, in a union hotel for the teachers in a city by the beach, and she asked me to go for a few days to the beach in Mar del Plata, is the city, with her. And I was just walking around, and I saw that two guys were unloading from a truck an arcade. I say, what is that? And it was one of the first Space Invaders that actually came to Argentina, 1979. And the guys put it in a small shop. They were opening a small arcade. They plug it. I put my first coin, and I was hooked like forever from that time. And I couldn't stop playing arcades, then Atari, Commodore 64. I programmed my own games in the Texas Instrument TI 90 something. I can't remember.
The calculator, you mean, like the TI 89 or whatever?
No, there was a computer with that you can actually put cartridges and play games. But I was always a gamer, and even when in the dictatorship, the arcades were forbidden, were banned. So there couldn't be arcades because the people cannot get together in the same place, to avoid conspiracy. So, but there were a couple of underground arcades close to the high school where I used to go, and yeah, and we found our way, with a password, and when we play games there as well.
So then, I guess by the time you saw this opportunity with Ubisoft, you were extremely well versed in what they do and what they offer.
Oh yes, yes. I have a lot of experience playing games. I have zero experience on making games or knowing how they were done. So they published this job post. Sound designer needed for new project in Ubisoft Toronto. Requirements: 5 or more years and in the industry and AAA shipped games, whatever, or more than 10 years in related industry. And say, okay, I have close to 20 years making movies and telling story with sound, so let's give it a try. So I had my interview with the person who was my first audio director and boss, Fabien Noel. He's the audio director of all Splinter Cells, and I was applying for Splinter Cell Blacklist. And I showed up and say, Fabien, I have my, you've seen my reel, you've seen my resume, and I'll be very straightforward. I love to make games. I think I can be cut for this, but I have no idea what you do or how you do it. And he told me, okay, you know how to make audio, you know how to tell stories with audio. Judging by your reel, you have a good ear. It's going to take you at least 2 years in the job to understand what we do here. And I was a bit skeptical at the beginning. Like, 2 years? Really? If audio is audio, maybe I can do it faster. But he wasn't wrong at all. The first day I was so lost. And and it was a complete different ecosystem and environment for me. But I loved it every single day. The first few weeks I returned home with a headache of all the information I was processing, and but I was so avid of getting more, enjoying every moment of it. It's the first time I was exposed to a truly interdisciplinary team. Dealing with game designers and animators and level designers and programmers and audio programmers, and I was over the moon. And that's how I started, in Splinter Cell Blacklist.
Do you remember the kinds of specifics, especially from that first, month or so? Are there any things that stand out in your memory of things that really felt truly new relative to your experience coming from film? Like something where you thought, okay, I'm not in Kansas anymore, as it were. This is definitely video games now.
Yeah, when when I did my first sound, I say, okay, how I put it in the game? And someone just looked to me and said, yeah, submit it in per force, man. So in per what? Submit what? Say, yeah, you need to put your files here, and then there's a build machine that creates a new version of the game. I say, well, okay, let's go slowly here. And I needed to work to understand from scratch what a middleware was. Back in those days, we used a proprietary middleware called Dare, and Blacklist was done in a very, very old version of customized version of Unreal that Ubisoft acquired back in the day, and it was difficult to deal with, and the pipeline was complicated. But I right away I knew that I wasn't in Kansas or Buenos Aires or Mar del Plata, you name it. I wasn't in Mexico or Iztapalapa, okay. But the challenges, the making things interactive, doubled up my love for sound design. The challenge, putting the sound in the player's hand, was like, okay, so this is a complete different level. I'm just no longer toying or manipulating emotions from a passive audience, along with a director or producer of a film. But I'm putting a live instrument in the hands of a player that can be played through a controller, and I need to make it work. So whatever they do, they play music with it, and that was my. This is the playing a 4D chess here.
Right. I mean, I think that's one of the things that probably all of us in games in general, but especially in the audio side, I suspect that's a sentiment we all tend to have in common. That moment where you realize I'm kind of a dance partner with somebody I haven't met before in the form of the player, that we're gonna create an experience together, and I'm gonna show up with my half and then essentially give them the tools to do their half. And that there's something really magical about that compared with, working to meticulously get this absolutely perfect mix so that they can, hit play in their DVD player, or, these days on Netflix or whatever, and experience it as a kind of finished, locked product. That's also really wonderful. But there's just something about, I mean, the way you said it is really, the 4D chess is probably an even better analogy than the future dance partner, but it's all coming from the same place. And I have nothing to add. I just relate heavily to everything you're saying.
Yes. Also from the, even from the music standpoint, and it's something that I admire from composers in video games, is the way they hand their babies, their assets, knowing that, because with a composer in film, they score for a scene or for or certain amount of shots or back to back, and sometimes they go to the re-recording stage at the end, and it's what they give you. And and here is the collaboration and the way composers give themselves to the game is different, because I'm getting the stems, I'm recutting them, I'm putting their precious two-track
Their
mix
baby.
into RTPCs that will be flown all over the map, depending on how hard the trigger gets pulled. And I think that also gives a complete new perspective. A few days ago, for the launch of Far Cry 6, we managed to bring Pedro Bronfman, the composer for the game, to the studio here.
I
And
saw you two sitting together with the game running.
yeah, and basically we played the game together after the pandemics and everything for the first time, and he was in awe, because there's a part of integration that he was missing during these lonely days of coming along to the studio and mixing and the integration of the from the team working from home, etc. And we played the play go, the first part of the game together, and he was like, wow. So it's a complete different story, and it speaks to the player, and in this case spoke to the composer even under a new light.
Well, let's get into that a bit then. I mean, obviously, you from the Splinter Cell, I think you worked on a few subsequent Far Cry titles, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
In more in kind of a primarily sound design role, or how did that evolve? Because obviously on Far Cry 6, you definitely are not merely a sound designer.
No. This after sound designer in Splinter Cell, I was moved into a Far Cry 4. That was my first Far Cry, my first open world, and with a small mandate. The core team was in Montreal, and we were in charge of some missions called the Shangri-La missions, where we need to create like a mythical, legendary environment where the player got teleported when opening some magic scrolls. And I was team lead on that, team of two, sound designer and I. We were both actually sound designer, but as I said, I was just taking the blame and for whatever that was my role. And after that, it seems like we didn't screw it that bad, and so we started working in Far Cry Primal. Now with a bigger team, Far Cry Primal was the Far Cry that was a first-person clubber, because you have a club instead of a gun, and then we did missions called the Epic Hunts, and I was in charge of creating all the sounds and feedbacks for what was called the Beastmaster mechanics, all the mechanics to tame the animals and then calling them, and that's a lot of work. Also with creatures from the sound design team, and from there. Probably what really prepared me for Far Cry 6, that was working in Far Cry 5. Still being a lead, still in co-development with the Montreal team. The audio director of all those games was Tony Gronick. And but we have a bigger mandate. Was my biggest team at that point, 8 people. We have more than 2 hours of cinematics. All the North region, the Jacob Seed, the guy that hypnotized the player playing Only You by the Platters. And that was, I learned a lot also from that experience. And I think from that progression, bigger world and everything, it was actually led me to Far Cry 6. And when I really wanted to be part of this project, I pester many people around to say, I want to be there. Far Cry 6 is done in Toronto. I have to be there. And for multiple reasons, not only the Latino component, I felt that in my career, I was mature enough to handle being the core, being at the core team, to ship the game from beginning to end, to have a say in creative calls. And because it's actually when you get to audio director that I think you can extend your range creatively as much as I wanted. All these 30 years of career led me to this point. I think I learned about stories and games and life enough to, okay, let's do this. And that's how my journey in Far Cry 6 started.
Would you say that is the opposite also true? Like on Far Cry 5, if for example, if Tony or somebody else, had vacated that position, would you have felt not ready? Would you have thought, I haven't lived enough, as you kind of put it?
No, probably not ready at that point to overtake on Far Cry 5. The team, along with Tony, had a work dynamic so so well oiled through the years in the franchise and knowing the brand, and that I would still feel a little of a bit of still a foreigner to knew all the nooks and crannies of a monstrous game. And because Far Cry 5 was big, but Far Cry 6 was bigger, and so
Yeah. Oh,
I,
yeah.
I think it was a good pace. Remember when my audio director told me it's gonna take you 2 years to learn how to make games? He was wrong. It takes you even more, and I'm still learning. And
Well, but that's
yeah,
exactly why I asked, because it's an interesting thread, and especially for anybody that listens to this later who's kind of early on in their career and they're kind of learning, as they go, as we all do. It's interesting that you felt, shipping multiple Far Cry titles in this, non-audio director capacity, and before that, of course, on Splinter Cell, and then 20 years of film post-production work and sound editing and all that kind of thing. The idea that, it took all of that before you say, now I suspect I'm ready. Because before, here's where this will turn slightly interrogation-esque, because when you were 17, somebody said, "Hey, can you do this?" And you said, "Sure," and then had to essentially bullshit your way through it to figure out how to do that. And that's what so many of what all of us do. So it seems like maybe it's part of the maturing process that you at some point said, "Okay, I probably can't do that now that we're talking about shipping an entire game. I really do have a lot to learn." But I still find it fascinating that you would have that I don't know what the word for it is. It's almost like discipline to feel like, okay, I'm not in a rush. I really do have a lot to learn. In my experience, I never know what I'm doing every time. And so if an opportunity comes up, I say yes and hope that I'll figure it out. You know what I mean?
yeah, at certain level is fine. I was feeling I was driving my career in the right direction enough not to screw it that bad,
Right.
to fall and not recover. Because when I was making music for friends that were trying to be filmmakers, I was a wannabe musician, wannabe sound designer, and they were wannabe film directors. And there was a level of amateurism, and that we all had the feeling that we could do anything. Then when you start dealing more with
Yeah, reality comes in.
with how strict things are, and and you have a game that needs to work in 8 different platforms, and is compliant or is not compliant. There's no much you cannot talk your way out of it.
Right.
And you know and if and the level of the players is different. I am a gamer. I have a profound admiration for the professionals, and even more for the professionals that work in the games that I played and I loved, and with other colleagues, directors and technical directors. And it would be bad for me to bluff. And also I wasn't in a hurry. When I told the management I want to be in Far Cry 6, it's because I was really sure I was able to pull it. And
Yeah, sure.
that was the thing.
Well, so step me through the process. I was very interested in the game in general, but obviously knowing we were going to be talking, I made it a priority to spend some time with it before this past weekend, and I think I was able to put in about 5 hours, which means I played 1/4% of the game, because it's just unbelievably massive. And but no, I was able to make a little bit. I basically made it through the destruction of the blockade. That's essentially the prologue. I feel like, because it's like, okay, now this island that feels relatively decent in size, now that's the child's table, and here's this giant rest of the map for you to have missions in and whatnot. And I just kept thinking, it was really fun to actually be playing it knowing we were gonna be talking about it, because the sheer amount of systems, and I'm certainly no stranger to those from the Assassin's Creed lane of things, but still, it's just so daunting. The first time I got in the car and La Vida Loca started playing, and my guy started singing along, and then I jumped out of the car in the middle of a phrase to see what would happen, and it was so seamless the way he stopped singing, but you could still hear the radio kind of trailing off because the car was moving, so it kind of drove away without me for a few meters, and I just thought, man, Eduardo, you really thought through a lot of shit here.
Yeah, you finished the musical phrase. Unless you get shot or something like that, and that's how the system was conceived, with the musicality of Danny Rojas being a Yara, being a Caribbean, with the rhythm in the blood, and it finished the phrase. Okay, yeah, then pull your AK and start killing bad guys.
Right. Yeah. Well, so I mean, how do you even begin before we even talk about music? Because I really love how multidimensional all the music is in the form of the source music and the like propagandistic military marches that my friend Ariel wrote, and of course Pedro's score, and there's a lot there. But how do you even begin kind of scoping a project like this? Obviously, as an audio director, you're at the table, so to speak, with the narrative team and the design team, and so you're obviously, I would think, able to have a sense of what's coming, from the earliest days. But still, how do you even go about starting to organize what the asset needs are going to be on a thing like this?
I started first with a plan, and having a plan and having a direction, because the world is huge. The mechanics
Truly
are infinite. The systems that collide are incredible. The sheer amount of more than 90 weapons, more than 40-something vehicles, more than 90 actors, more than 2 hours of cinematics. The numbers are huge. But dealing with numbers, having a good team, an amazing team that I have here in Toronto and in Montreal, I don't feel much stress about it, because they are lovely. They go above and beyond to get quality. My role is more on being the man with a plan. So when anyone turned to me and say, "Okay, Eduardo, now where to?" So I needed to be the person with the answer. And
right.
so I start by building what are the pillars for the game. The world pillars. To be believable, to be consistent, to be cohesive, and to be inviting, to be true to a Latino Caribbean island in every aspect. How the people sound, how the music sound, how we build the world with music, how we show oppression, and how is to live in a regime almost a fascist regime, like Anton Castillo's one, and also in the other pillar, the score, the gameplay, how we can engage the player, keep it inside the world, and at the same time give them beauty, because at the end is that we are in the entertainment industry, so we entertain trying to give a beauty and content. Then people can take it as far and deep as they want or not, but we need to present the options well crafted, at least.
Yeah, I think that really comes through because it's obviously living under an oppressive government with military who will, if you wander into their camp, they'll just start shooting at you. That the game could have a very dark and bleak quality, like a dystopian kind of sensibility, very easily. And I feel like there's, even despite how horrible that narrative premise is, and obviously it's a very realistic one. It's one that Yara may be a fictional island, but there've been a lot of people in the world that have had to endure pretty similar circumstances. It's very clear that this was all done respectfully and authentically, across the board, from your department through to the writing and everything else. None of it rings hollow to me. Not that I've had to live through that. I wouldn't pretend to know firsthand, but it certainly feels like something that is below a surface level. But despite all of that, there is a joy and a beauty in everything. It doesn't treat the word video game as this reductive idea that, all that matters is that it's fun and anything else is window dressing. It does feel like it takes the narrative, the subtext, well, not even subtext, the literal storytelling. It takes it seriously and respectfully, but it still does so with a certain amount of, I don't know, the word I keep coming back to is joy. When I was playing it, I just thought, it feels like down to every last little detail. When I crouch through the bushes and the branches bend away from me as I move, and I can hear the sound reflecting that, and all of that. It feels like everybody was really eager to make something really just beautiful. I hope I'm not projecting and that it wasn't like some wildly stressful, horrible experience, because it really seems like everybody really kind of, it creates the impression, at least, of everybody really stepping into it with a certain amount of joy in their work.
Yeah, I think it's the eternal duality, that we counter fight horrors with the beauty we can find. And sometimes there are critics because of that, because of the tone. Anton Castillo, you see someone being beaten to death, and then you have a crocodile with a gold tooth that is your friend. And
right, sure.
But that is needed. There are dense games that are very interesting, and like The War of Mine, and
sure,
that really take on serious subjects and dark subjects. But I don't know if I would play this game if it were 50, 60, 70 hours of darkness. I don't think is bearable if we only take that. And also, even living myself in a dictatorship, the militaries were there. There were music you couldn't hear. There were books you couldn't get. There were things you couldn't do. But the music was still there. There were
Right.
bands, and there were beauty, and there were love, and people still were able to dance at home, and so they can. Uh, I can't remember how the expression would translate. No, that they can cut the flowers, but they cannot stop the spring,
Right.
and so that is the one thing, and the flowers keep popping, and the fun music and the hype and the salsa and the bodies moving. So that's still there, even if the FND, if the bad guys are around, interrogating or trying to take outcast for the plantations. I think it's about some people like it better than other, and respect for that.
Sure.
Uh,
Were there any times um, during the process where you were able? This is just my own. This has nothing really to do with audio necessarily, but because you're able to speak to the realities of the story being told with a much closer firsthand taste than probably the majority of Canadians in Toronto or Montreal, I would think, on the core team. Were there ever instances where you were able to course correct and say, hey, um, this is actually X or Y or Z that we're talking about would actually have been a little different from that, and I may I make a suggestion? You get what I'm asking. I would think there were certainly opportunities for that sort of insight.
yeah, I would say that rather than me going to suggest, I was warmly welcomed by the narrative team, by the narrative director, Navid Havari, to give my input and to be part of the process. So when they start discussing about propaganda, I took from archives, So this is how the generals talk to the Argentinians in the so-called comunicados back in the days, and I gave the material and I translate them for them. So this is the tone, and I was part of the process. So if we want to make the regime omnipresent, and there should be one voice that is like the official announcer of the
Mm-hmm.
regime, always the same voice, and it talks and speaks to the people through PA in this way, and that was all welcome. I didn't need to elbow my way on correcting the course. I think they also saw the opportunity on having my point of view,
Sure.
along with other sensitivity experts and people that was and people expert on Latin American studies, that was a part of the team, and yeah, and I loved it. But when it came to music and my music choices, I have all the range I wanted, as I research Afro-Cuban music and Afro-Caribbean music and the different type of genres and everything. And I brought, okay, so this is how Yara is going to sound, and say, cool, go. And yeah, and then that's all I needed.
Yeah, well, let's get into that then a bit. First off, with regard to the score, how did you connect with Pedro?
Oh, that was through Simon Landry from UB Music.
Yeah, right.
And when I was in the process of considering different composers, he invited Pedro to pitch for another project. And and I was told, okay, we manage everything, composers through UB Music, and talk to Simon. So I gave him my pitch. So this is Yara. This is how I feel. And score that has some Latin American roots, but not the cliche. I don't want the pee 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 pee. In a combat. And so do you have someone in mind? So I just pitched the guy from Narcos. He told me. Said, oh, interesting, the guy from Narcos, and I start listening some material from Pedro, and then going back and forth and having also a consulting with other stakeholders. Say, I think we are going to get a good score with this composer, and we ended up having a magnificent score. So I'm happy.
Yeah, he did a great job, and one of the things that I like is that it's pretty. In general, it has a pretty light touch. Again, I of course have only played a small portion of the game, so I'm sure there's quite a bit I haven't heard, but there's a lot of emphasis on letting the environment do a lot of the speaking, and there's a lot of these very intimate moments where it's obviously not some big orchestral score. It's not super heavy, like grungy blaring synths or things like that. It's there are those moments. There's definitely a few like combat encounters where it really goes for it, from what I've heard so far. But it definitely felt like this is going to be given a lot of air. Is that a fair way to describe it from your point of view?
Yes. That was one of the things we worked together. The soundscape of the game is quite dense, per se. So we have guns, we have explosions, we have barks, we have finally a player with a voice on their own that reacts to things and became the center channel of the mix and the pillar, and we want the score to flow around that, being creating the least interference with the guns, but being there to know we are now in combat or we are now in stealth. Oh, so this is the drumming for the last man standing. Pick your last guy and kill it, and you will be liberating this outpost. And in terms of the instrumentation that Pedro chose for the game, I think it's a good call not being orchestral, because this is not the epic of a warrior or an army. So this is kind of the epic of the common man that goes driven into being a guerrilla, and then it turns a warrior, but it's not a player in a shiny armor, and that we know it's a paladin. So there's no paladins here, and no. They call each other heroes, but they make themselves heroes through sacrifice. They didn't jump into the game like, okay, I'm the super special operations guy, and I have all the gear and everything, and I will solve all your problems, and then we go with the fanfares and everything. And so the approach was a bit like that, using some South American and Latin American instruments and percussion, mixing it with other textures that are related to what we call the mental map. That is, what are the activities and main characters of every region, and have something in the music that reflect these characters or activities.
Meaning like the map is divided up in a literal sense, where there might be specific kind of sounds that you only hear in that area of the map?
100%. Yes. So once you leave the small island where you have the play go, you access to Yara, that is humongous.
Mm-hmm.
So then you have the Madrugada, the west, Valle de Oro, that is the central region, and El Este, that is the east region. Each one of them have a group with a different way to see the revolution, and the objective of the player is to unify all of them against Castillo under the flag of Libertad. But in every region has its own problems and its own conflicts. So in the east is a very industrial part, is where the poison gets processed, and you have a lot of pipes and industrial architecture in decline. So there we have more distorted guitars, industrial processed percussion. If we go to the central region, the heroes there are Maximas Matanzas, is a rap group. So we have more synth from the 90s, influenced by hip hop from those years, drum machines, and that electronic percussion.
Mm-hmm.
And the West is agricultural, is where the tobacco is grown, and there you have more acoustic predominance over the general instrumentation, more use of acoustic guitar, nylon strings, and more skin drum percussion.
Is this the kind of thing that occurred to you early on, or was this the subject of experimentation and trial? Or and it also related to that question, is this the kind of thing that you figured this out and pitched this to Pedro as, here's how we'd like to approach it, or did this come about through your collaboration with him? This regional separation that you're talking about.
Let's say that I planted the seed because I was the one knowing the game, from A to Z.
Right.
And so the options on the sound palette were suggested, and Pedro took from there, from his own creative universe. I kind of set certain constraints because I found that humans work better within constraints, and and he thrived in within those constraints.
So in other words, you had him only record everything to 2-inch tape, and there was no Pro Tools allowed, and everything had to be exactly like the old days.
Yeah, a wire recorder actually.
Yeah,
has
perfect.
A better bass.
Yeah, that's pure evil. Well, so then, how long would you say this? This is all very fascinating to me, because on a project like this, things happen a bunch of different ways. But how long were you kind of figuring all of this out internally with the team before he joined you, in other words? So like, if the game just came out in, the fall of 2021, at what point did he join the project, and how long before that had you already been on it, kind of figuring out some of these constraints?
He joined around 2019 or late 2018, maybe from the beginning. It was a long process, and because the game went through also through several iterations, and we have a first run with for the first playable prototype, when we presented that to headquarters, and he make this music that ended up mostly in the first cinematic we see now in the game, and in the introduction with Viviro and all that with Castillo's speech, and
Mm-hmm.
he make one mission, and then we wait for things to have in a better shape. I try to reduce the amount of friction with with composers and with uh, all creative person I have the luck to work with in general. Try to give them as much closer approach to how the reality of the end product will be.
Right.
Because even if we are all professionals and we all scrap things and start from scratch many times, the least we do that, it creates a better, a better work environment.
Sure. Yeah. It's hard to argue with that. Well, so just again, I'm curious on all this kind of trivia, like how long Pedro was involved, how much score ended up being in there in the end.
Uh, Pedro wrote more than 3 hours, and then we edit, and we always create new cues here and there
Yeah, sure, of
of
course.
music, and I say that there is maybe 4 to 5 hours of original score if we put it all, back to back, and then we have more commissioned score for the diegetic side of it.
Yeah, I want to
The
talk about that next because I loved um, the lengths that were gone to there, not to just find a bunch of needle drops, but to actually commission. I especially loved Ariel's contribution of these kind of marches. It's such a striking thing because I watched your video. I watched the behind the scenes when you see him working with the musicians, and I've known him for years. So this was in a way not a huge surprise to see him do a great job. But I didn't expect that you would really hear these quite constantly in the game because of these big speakers that play the kind of propagandistic messages, and it really actually adds a lot to the environment and to the storytelling, like to the immersion, I guess you could say.
Yes, that was amazing. Working with Ariel I knew Ariel. I think in 2015, I attended a festival in Mexico called Creativa Fest, Creative Fest.
Mm.
I gave a talk about my work in Far Cry 4, and we met there, and we became friends, and we were always fantasizing, one day we need to work together. Yes, man, we need to work together. But I cannot decide on music yet. I'm not an audio director. Man, I need to make more music. And the he shipped a lot of games in the meantime. I shipped some games in the meantime, and this opportunity came, and I picked up the phone, and I called Ariel and say, would you like to work with me in a game? The game wasn't announced by then, and say, yeah, what game? Say, well, don't say anything, but it's Far Cry 6.
His head
And
exploded, I imagine.
he was quiet. Say, no. He asked me again. No, what game you are asking me to work in? Say, Far Cry 6. He couldn't believe it at the beginning. I said, yeah, man, I have this idea of depicting the regime with the military marches, very similar to Latin American military marches that they use in the military academy and the ones they used to drill our brains back when we were kids. And well, he's way younger than me, and didn't need to live through a military dictatorship, but still in the schools and everything, that thing was present. And say, but I have a secondary challenge here. I don't want the professional orchestra to play this, because once someone told me, military marches are to music what militaries are to democracy. Someone told me back in the days. And
I never heard that one before. That's interesting.
yeah, it was a Latin American point of view, And I say, I want these pieces to be performed by a real military orchestra, a marching band, or something like that. No, by professional. There's something greedy, slightly out of tune, slightly out of sync, in musicians that, they are law enforcement and
Right.
they are musicians, and they're not sessionists that spend all their life. So it's a bit of also the big theme of duality, playing playing in the square of the town for the people, and marches and sometimes covers from other type of music, and at the same time being law enforcement. And he managed to contact people from some members from a police band, some members from other orchestras, and assembled a group of 28 musicians that he conducted. So we worked with some MIDI demos back and forth, and he wrote them, arranged the pieces, and yeah. And then when we had the 6 especially composed military marches, and say, and now we need an anthem, because if Yara is a real thing, it's a real place. It's a place with a past and with a present. We need an anthem. So I did some research and wrote the lyrics of the anthem, and I sent it to Ariel. I said, write something based on these lyrics. So we are like the anthem composers from 1840, 1830. And he sent me that. It sounded great. And then I found an opera tenor here in Toronto, and I recorded the lyrics.
Wow. I did not know that part. That's funny. Well, it is, I mean, that's such, in many ways, what he had to do, I think, is more difficult than the actual score, because these pieces, as you just said, they have real history. And like the real world counterparts, I mean, have real history. You know, these anthems that in some cases are hundreds of years old, it's very difficult to pull that out of nowhere and have it feel old, have it feel like it's embedded in the culture and like there's an authenticity to it. So I don't envy his task. It's like saying, just go write a new Canadian national anthem or American national anthem or something. I mean, it's how do you simulate a piece that theoretically millions of school children would know and have grown up with and all that kind of thing. It's one of the more difficult composer challenges, I think, that one could have handed anyone.
Yeah, I agree, because we can find words to adjectives to guide the creative process, like pride, patriotism, honor, sacrifice, but someone needs to put it in,
Yeah.
in 5 lines and draw the notes, and
Exactly.
so he pulled a big one, and then getting the sound of military march orchestra, performed by people that are actually part of it, for me was like the ribbon on top.
Yeah, I mean that's a perfect description, and it's amazing how well it all works together. And then on top of that, there's all this licensed music, and the original songs. I saw the I haven't like found this character in the game yet. I didn't play long enough, but the kind of revolutionary rapper that I saw featured in your behind the scenes. Um, just again, the lengths gone to in every dimension. It's truly remarkable. I mean, have you clocked the total amount of music in the project? In general.
Oh, I'd say probably more than 10 hours. Between license and commissioned and everything. There's a lot of music, and there's some additional music that is based on Easter eggs, because there's some things you do, and after you do it, if you listen the song while you're doing it, that song is added to the radio roster, for example.
Right, sure.
And and the USB keys that you find, the collectibles, so you have another songs there. It was a nice, let's say, reconnection with the Latino music. For me, this project, I had to see, what's out there. I didn't want to just showcase, all Ricky Martins and Camila
Right, sure.
Cabello and Daddy Yankee. I want to showcase less known artists. I think there's so much talent out there that needs to get to a bigger stage, and coming from where I come and being the position where I am, I feel I need to give back. I need to give back to all the artists, all the people that nurture their art, and they cannot have the privilege of working AAA games or have successful Spotify channels. So I start digging on people from Colombia, Chile, Argentina, Peru, Dominican Republic, Venezuela, Cuba, some Cubans that cannot actually publish when they were in the island, but now they are available because they went into exile because of political reasons. And I reached to them, and like the rapper Bárbaro el Urbano, and in the case of Gabilonia, for example, now Venezuelan rapper that it was already recognized in the Latin American scene. She's been in the Latino hip hop and rap scene for a while, but I felt I needed to do something with her because she's so real. Venezuela is a very difficult country to live now, and she has not a diva artist persona, so she's the same person on the stage, and and in front of a cup of coffee. So there's is 100% Gabilonia.
Yeah, very authentic.
I say you need to write something. The actress is the voiceover actress is Mercedes Morris. So because Gabilonia doesn't speak English, so that was one of the things. So the Talia's singing voice is not Talia's acting voice. It's something I had to live with, but I wanted the authenticity of Gabilonia for the for the lyrics and for the way she raps
Sure.
and write. No, she was censored for Maduro's regime, and it's one of those things in production that sometimes are difficult to find in North America. So you were calling an artist the whole day, and by night that the artist called you back and say, "I'm sorry, I couldn't pull my cell phone because I was in a neighborhood that I would be killed if someone see me with a cell phone."
Oh, God.
And say, "Okay, Gabby, it doesn't matter. It's 10 p.m. So let's have our meeting now." And yeah,
It says so much about, I mean, it's such an interesting thing because that obviously, I at least, I'm sure you agree, or I would imagine, feel very grateful to not have to live in an environment like that. And but there is such value in tapping into those that do, to share that message with the world. Otherwise, it's easy to lose contact with that. There's a lot of people that live in really difficult circumstances around the world, and if we're creating art, from the kind of privileged position of not having to do that, by reaching out and collaborating with people like that in order to make sure that those voices are heard and that message is amplified, is a really powerful and beautiful, beautiful in the sense of meaningful, is a meaningful thing. And I didn't know, obviously, that some of what you just said is represented in the kind of official material that was put out there, but there's definitely some details in here that I hadn't heard, and it's actually quite moving. It's affecting to hear that this was such a priority for you, and I imagine for everybody else on the team, to capture those, to involve these kinds of people, that this isn't an abstract concept for someone like her or some of these others. This is a thing that they are surviving day by day, and it's just so meaningful. I find it's beautiful, even if there's an underlying kind of tragic nature to it. It is still beautiful that there is something like a game like this to give voice to what they have to endure, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. For me, it was essential to bring that part into a game, to be represented in a way. So Gabby just, we became friends. She called me just yesterday and say, Eduardo, God bless you. Things are so good. We couldn't catch up. The last week, we barely have power or internet. And so I couldn't send you a message, or I just got internet again, and I found thousands of love messages and people recognizing the work, and
That's amazing.
and it's trending in Spotify. The soundtrack for me is so rewarding, and the same when I went to Cuba to record the ambiences, and I sat there, in a small shack with farmers, people that maybe make $15 a month, and they
Wow.
are so generous, and they invite you to what do you want to record? Are you looking for some bird in special? Our national bird is el tocororo, and it sings like this, and you can find it in the trees over there. And I go 38, 39 degrees, 90% humidity, carrying the microphones and the recorder. But if the farmer, if the Guajiro cares about the tocororo, to be the national bird and mean something to him, I need to bring it in the game in a way. And now they hear the tocororo, probably 99.9% of the people won't care or won't pay attention. Maybe not. But I've seen people from Cuba and from also Cubans living abroad that leave messages on Reddit or other forums, and they are grateful that we went there. Even I was chatting with a guy in Cuba that he told me how they can pirate the game over there because they have no internet connection, and making it work in a computer that is 5 years old, and
Yeah, that's brutal. Yeah, I'm sure.
you're fine, man. I'm not going to chase you. But he was.
That's such a funny thought. It's like you're gonna like go report him,
Yeah, you're only one of the. I wanted more people actually in Cuba to play it because the main inspiration is brought from there, and it's a good thing with the whole list of songs in the radio is something I was curating for a long time. And when you also curate a playlist for a radio, you find artists that they just don't want to be part of the video game. They are not part of this universe, or they ask you what the video game is about, and they say, no, I prefer not to be in a shooter. And they come from Colombia that has been in civil war for 60 years. So I say, man, all my respect, your music will not be in the game, and I will not insist. And so that is the other side of it.
Yeah. Until the last 6 months, I would have found that surprising, but I actually recently found a musician on YouTube who he was recording a very esoteric instrument in a church, like on his phone. And it was a beautiful instrument. He was playing it really well. And as far as I could tell, he was like the only person I could ever find who had this particular instrument. And so I tracked down his email address. Actually, I had to leave a comment on the YouTube video to say, hey, can you tell me how to reach you? And he had the same reaction. I said, I'm working on a project on a video game, and I'd love for you to be a part of it. I'd love you to be a featured part of it. And he said, can you tell me more about it? And I said, well, I'm a little bit restricted in terms of the confidentiality agreements, but I can tell you a little bit. But I'm curious why you're asking, because I'm like, is there something I'm missing? And he said, yeah, well, I just want to make sure that it's something that I kind of philosophically can support, or that I feel harmonizes with my overall sort of worldview. And I remember thinking, wow, that, and of course I told him a little bit, and he said, oh, okay, no, sounds great. And there was no problem. But it was a fascinating, I'm used to working with musicians, I think, who, like session musicians, for example, who play orchestral recording dates, they never ask questions like that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with them not asking. I think it's just they're fine being part of basically anything. So it was interesting that someone would say, this is very personal for me, and I would never want a project that I have big problems with to feature my playing in it. It was new. I had never come across that, but I could totally imagine, especially if you're talking about licensing artists. If this game was super exploitative in some way, obviously, of course it wouldn't be, and it's no surprise given how important it was to all of you that it not be. But if it were, I could see how they would take one look at it and go, this isn't a joke for us. This isn't some silly thing meant to entertain a bunch of middle-class kids in America. Like, this is our life. Of course, just fuck off. I'm not going to give you other rights to my music. So anyway, it's just it's cool to hear these people. Cool is probably not the right word. It's fascinating. And it's moving just to see how much people kind of make themselves part of it.
Yeah, I think we pursue ways of artistic expression in different ways. I found my output in through video games. You found yours, and and some people have theirs, and to find that artistical realization, to connect with something. And I'm all about how sacred, or what is your relationship with your artistic object in a way. So it's
It's a
the
great way to
same, the
put it.
people that care about the sound of guns. They are precious, and they say when the primer explodes, the pin, hits the primer, and then if it's a high speed caliber, it sounds like this, and if we have a suppressor, it sounds like that. And it's also that they express themselves also
For
on that.
sure.
Same thing with the people say, how are you putting the sound of a 4-cylinder vehicle in a V8? This is no, it's a
Blasphemy.
sacrilege. No, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I was even going to bring up the cars are particularly a prescient example of that, because especially on these Gran Turismo or Forza motorsport kind of games, the amount of care and detail that the sound designers put into those to make sure that all the overtones of the engine idling and all that is captured you are absolutely right to say that these folks are expressing themselves as artists no differently than I am, or any musician or composer is as well.
Yeah, it's like we have also our prerogatives, as an artist in a different level. If I ask you, hey Austin, give me just a couple of notes in a piano, you do casual, I put it in the game, I say, wait. I won't give you just few notes in a piano so it gets into a AAA game. No, it's you also have your own level of self, what you expect from yourself to give to your audience, and that's also how we validate ourselves. Some people is
Absolutely.
very protective about what is my song, what my song is going to be used for, and we are also very protective of no, I won't give you just 4 sounds so you put it somewhere.
Right.
And so it's the same thing, but with a different perspective.
One, just circling back really quickly to Gabilonia, just pragmatically, how did you record her? Just if she's I can't call you back because the cell phone is illegal here, or we lost internet this week, or whatever. How did you possibly find a recording studio and that sort of thing? How did you even deal with those kinds of challenges?
Well, she crossed border and demo the songs and recorded vocals in Colombia, in Bogota. And then I wanted her to perform for the performance capture, for the cinematic, and also to give me a different performance, a live performance of the song we have in the radio for the mission, to have a different pace or have a different delivery. So I told the production, we need to bring Gabilonia. Oh yeah, sure, we bring it. Okay, so it's not that easy to bring Venezuelan around.
Yeah, no kidding.
And yeah, her visa was rejected 3 times.
Wow, even with a company like Ubisoft behind her.
Even with a company, but with Ubisoft, even with a temporary work permit, and she has a daughter and a family in Caracas, but they were always suspecting she was going to land here and never come back.
And then disappear, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, my girlfriend is actually from Costa Rica. And she has dealt repeatedly with this as well. And Costa Rica is, a politically stable country, and so I can understand the Canadian government perspective on this. But you would think that Ubisoft, which is surely one of the most prominent employers of people in the entire country, you would think that that would just be an automatic, sure, anyone you vouch for, we can sign off on. It just shows how volatile it all is and what a nightmare.
Yeah, so finally we got it here. We got her here, and it was in the previous day of the big lockdown of March 2020. And so she arrived finally, and then COVID was start popping up everywhere. The government wasn't actually saying if they were going to close the borders or not. Everyone was very scared. How are we going to end this game if everyone needs to stay at home?
Right.
And she was meant to be here for 4 days, 1 day of rehearsal, 1 day for the performance capture, 1 day for marketing, 1 day for the recording, take our time, enjoy the moment. And then I was told she needs to leave in 1 or 2 days, because otherwise we are not sure if we can send her back, because the borders are crossing. And so after all that waiting and everything, I sit with Gabilonia, and I told Gabi, so you need to do 4 days of work in 1 day. I'm very sorry, so this is the way it plays. How you say it? Of course, Pana. And say, let's go do it. And she did the performance capture, take 1 or take 2 there, the live rap. She did it. She did like an 1 hour interview, and it was fantastic. I was sort of a chaperone and translator, because she couldn't communicate with the team. And when I sent her back, things were becoming very serious. Borders were definitely closing, and she was returning to Caracas via Panama. And by the time she was in the airport, I saw in an alert that Panama was closing the borders and grounding all flights.
Wow.
On the spot, I thought, okay, Eduardo, what do we do here? She cannot stay in Canada. Like, we don't know how long. She doesn't even speak the language. And I say, Venezuela is already part of the axis of evil, for the certain administrations.
Sure, yeah.
And what do? I say, you're going to La Habana, because for the relationship between Cuba and Venezuela, it was more likely for her to be able to return rather than from any other country.
Makes total sense.
And I didn't want to send her, via the States or any other country, because we didn't really know how long she would be stranded. So she went to La Habana. She was sort of stranded there for 4 or 5 days, until there was a humanitarian flight from Havana to Caracas sending doctors, and she could get in one of those flights. And then I had to write a letter to their family so they could pick her up from the airport, because there were military checkpoints, because nobody would be able to get in or out of the airport in Caracas. Everything that was closed with real checkpoint, just like in the game. So I wrote a letter. Wow. So they are picking up Gabilonia. She just worked with Ubisoft Toronto in a big production, blah, blah, blah. Boom, treat them well. And she made it.
Unbelievable. It's funny. I was I figured there would be some interesting story, but you way outperformed my expectations. That's incredible. Well, I'm glad she made it safely, and it's really lovely to hear that she's been able to get all the, love and kind of well wishing of people who discover the game and hear her work in it and all that. And just the whole thing is just such a wonderful thing. Every aspect of the game really is, I have a bit of a bias in favor of Ubisoft in general. I've worked with the company a few times. I've had really wonderful experiences. I know how hard everybody works, but it is still amazing to me to see the lengths that are gone to, like you said, the right birds are heard, in this particular area of the island. And somewhere in the world, there's someone who plays the game who will pick up on that and go, oh, wow, they could have done anything, or they could have just grabbed a sound effect library and have some like bird from Florida and 99% of players wouldn't know the difference, but they didn't do that. And it's just amazing. I just love hearing all of this.
Yeah. I think when we make games big, incredibly big, like these ones, we have things that are what is a player face, things that the player will experience very, very present and right away. And then I think we throw a lot of messages in bottles here and there, and especially in open world. And then people start picking them up. There was an Easter egg discovered in Reddit just a couple of days. One of our a sound designer, the guy that was actually the team lead in Toronto, Cameron Britton, he put in a radio inside the cave some loop with a Morse code, the beep 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 beep,
Yeah.
and the Morse code was saying Cameron Britton is the greatest sound designer in the world. It was an internal joke. Say whatever. It's PDP. Who gonna pick it? And last week someone say I decoded the Morse code, inside the cave in that area. And who is Cameron Britton? And people start googling his name, and a lot of Cameron Britton start popping up, and
that's
we really
so damn funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I love that the game's only been out for what, 2 weeks, if even, and it's already someone found that. That's too funny.
Yeah, that's why I feel the player needs to be in mind all the time in every step we do, because they care. And something I heard from a composer as well. In one of my first MIGs, I went here in Montreal. He said that the pizza delivery recognized his name and start almost hug him, when delivering the pizza, because of all the fond memories he had while playing that game. So we touch people in ways we don't imagine or even understand.
Absolutely.
So that's why if we get that extra layer of care, it's going to pay. For someone, it's going to pay, and it's going to mean something.
Well, that is an absolutely perfect note to end on. You brought the plane in for a landing rather perfectly, if I may say. I could sit here and listen to you unpack these details for hours, but I think 2 hours is already, you've been very generous with your time. So thank you so much. This has been I don't even know how to describe it. I feel like I've been sitting on the edge of my seat because there's just so many great little things that I had no idea about.
Oh man, I have I really wish to go over there one day, for GDC 3, and then we can sit, and I have so many other stories, to hear from you first and then to tell you.
Well, yeah, I have a story or two of my own, but I'm happy to just keep buying you drinks and making you keep going on and on and on. So, well, sir, I thank you so much for agreeing to do this and for continuing the our new tradition in its early sort of virginal state of presenting the audio director perspective for this podcast, because I think it's a very valuable one, and I guess we'll just have to do it again.
Yeah, anytime. It was a pleasure. I had a lot of fun doing it.
Thank you for joining us for the Game Maker's Notebook. For more information on the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, our podcasts, and our other initiatives, please visit www.interactive.org.